Hello, my name is Stephanie J. Woods, and this is how I create.
Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. I am so pleased to have Stephanie J. Woods on the podcast. Stephanie J. Woods is a multimedia artist based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she is an assistant professor of interdisciplinary art at the University of New Mexico, working primarily in the fields of photography, fiber, video, and sculpture. She creates mixed media works, handcrafting the props featured in her photographs. Raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, she cultivates an artistic practice concerned with exploring Black American culture, identity, and the impact of involuntary cultural assimilation. In 2021, Woods was selected to attend the artist residency Black Rock Senegal, located in Dakar, Senegal. And in 2021, Woods was also awarded the 1858 Prize for Contemporary Southern Art, awarded by the Gibbs Museum of Art in Charleston, South Carolina. Stephanie J. Woods is also the recipient of several other awards, residencies, and fellowships, including the 2022 Harpo Prize, the Fine Arts Work Center Fellowship, Acre Residency, the McCall Center for Art and Innovation, Oxbow School of Art and Artists Residency, and the Penland School of Craft. Her work is featured in the permanent collections at the Virginia Museum of Fine Art and the Gibbs Museum of Art. Additionally, she has been featured in Bomb Magazine, Art Papers, Lens Scratch, Burn Away, and the Boston Art Review. Can we just say how excited we are to have Stephanie J. Woods on the podcast? Hi, Stephanie.
Hello, thank you.
Oh gosh, you are so accomplished and have such an amazing eye. I want to go back to North Carolina, to you growing up in Charlotte. Can you talk to me about yourself as a young child? How did you first think about art and get exposed to art?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, was raised in Seneca, well, was born in Seneca, South Carolina, grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And my exposure to the arts was very limited just based off of where I was growing up at that time. Charlotte has grown a lot since when I was younger, but when I was younger, there wasn't much exposure going on with the arts, specifically within my family. So my mother is an accountant, and my dad, he's a businessman. Both of them are kind of really centered in those areas. Me and my brother are oddballs. We were the artists in the family. So my brother's a graphic designer, and it was basically my exposure to the arts was through him. My dad did love to dance, and my mom, she liked to draw on the side, but it was almost as if these like little side things that they did. So a lot of it was me and my brother. My brother draws really well. He's a wonderful drawer. I cannot draw. Most of my experience in art is with sculpture and like performance and things of that manner. So it was really nice. Me and my brother would sit at the kitchen table and then draw like different characters like Donald Duck, Goofy, and then I would try to one him up all the time. So he's my older brother, so I would bring my drawings and show him like, look what I did. This is way better. Like just kind of like this friendly competition between the two of us. And both of us now are working within the arts. But I also would credit my mother. My mother saw that I was really interested at that time in fashion, so she signed me up to take classes with a seamstress, and I went to Miss Ruth's house, that's her name, like every day after school and learned how to sew. And she also put me in a lot of art camps, specifically not visual art, but theater. So I did a lot of theater camps, writing camps, culinary arts, and I also played an instrument. So I was interested in all the other fields of art outside of visual art. And that wasn't until I got to like college where I actually considered being a visual art studio artist.
Oh gosh. Well, I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that. So, Stephanie, I read that when you were in school, you went through school and you were a sculpture major. Is that correct?
Yes, when I was in college, yes, I studied sculpture, specifically ceramics. That was my specialty, was ceramics. And at the school I went to, they merged ceramics and sculpture together, where in a lot of programs you see ceramics separate from sculpture.
Is it also true that you went through school without taking a painting class? Is that true?
Yeah, I went all the way through art school without taking a painting class. I signed up for it, never went to the first day, and then dropped and went to my ceramics class instead. So, and somehow they didn't make it a requirement. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'd love for you to talk to me about your journey to where you are now. I know that it's a long journey, and it's always easy in retrospect to say, oh, yeah, I did this and this and that and got these residencies, and now I'm a professor, you know? It's a lot more nuanced than that. I'd love for you to talk to me about your eye and how you see the world.
The way that I see the world is really nuanced, and like you'll see this in a lot of my work, even though it's dealing with complex issues, a lot of it is rooted in like very small moments. That is just conversations that I have with people. It could be just a phrase that someone says to me, and then it will kind of turn into this whole imagery and visuals inside of my head that I'm thinking about. But I would say the journey has been, I graduated grad school in 2015. I went to probably three different undergrads. So it started off with me not really knowing what I wanted to major in, going to all these different schools. And then that's how I ended up getting my graduate and my undergraduate degree at the same school, because once I really decided what I wanted to do, I was already in my third year of college when I finally transferred to UNC Greensboro and decided, oh, I want to be an artist. I had the privilege of being able to stay there to continue my education versus I feel like if I wouldn't have stayed, I don't know if I would be an artist right now. I got my professor job in 2021. So I was adjuncting part time at VCU in Richmond, Virginia. My husband was going to grad school at VCU in the photo and film area. And then I was like, I can't keep doing this. I'm not making any work. That's when I became very engulfed in applications and was trying to find residencies that I could attend so I can spend more time in my practice. I applied to so many things, and then I got lucky. I got three residencies back to back lined up. I quit working at VCU and then just spent 2 years going to artist residencies because of the way that I lined up my applications, it just worked out really well. And so during those 2 years, I was also applying for teaching jobs. And I applied for 3 years back to teaching jobs. And then finally I got to Black Rock Senegal, which was the residency created by Kehinde Wiley. And you can see a different shift in my applications for jobs. Like after I got that residency, there was more. I had like offers from three different institutions to teach there because of that. That was kind of like the journey that I took in regards to becoming a professor. But the way that I see it, I'm really influenced by my environment, people, and places. The smallest little thing, just like water on grass, can turn into a whole video piece for me. I try to be very in tune into like my environment and everywhere that I'm visiting.
So is it, I think you just mentioned that after going to Black Rock, that's when you started getting more interest when you applied for teaching jobs. Is that what you were mentioning? So tell us a little bit about Black Rock then.
So I was in Senegal for 2 months. And so it was the residency that's created by Kehinde Wiley. It was 2 months of being spoiled. He centers the residency around wanting to spoil artists. You definitely get that when you get there. So when I got there, I was welcomed with like a dance and a song, which was really awesome. You have your own apartment kind of on the compound, which is also where his studio is located. And then you get your own studio on another section of the compound that faces the Atlantic Ocean. I was there for 2 months. And while I was there, I learned batik dyeing with an artist by the name of Osman Ba. I just went around and just explored the place and learned how to cook a lot of Senegalese dishes. That was one of them I found was really similar to a dish that I grew up eating, supu kanji, which is like an okra. I call it an okra gumbo, but that's the way I grew up eating okra in the same. My mother has like a garden where we grow okra and harvest it. Um, did that. I did a lot of relaxing and a lot of them cooking for us and just spoiling us. It was just a very relaxing residency. It's hard to really put it in words because it impacted me way beyond having time and space to create work. It has really changed the trajectory of my life in the way that I look at things and move now. So it was the best one that I've been to.
I think it might be a good idea for us to first talking about your mother's garden. The images and the photos that you have on your Instagram of your mother's garden is incredible. It's like a farm. It's not just a garden. And the images of everything that you've harvested from her garden are just really, I find it really interesting and moving. And in some ways, in prepping for this, I could see the line of the time it takes for the garden to grow and to harvest and to cultivate the garden, and how that might or might not play with your work. So the first thing I want to talk about is about quilting and how you use the images that you've grown up with, images from your family archive, how you use that in your work, and how you use some of the things that you've grown up with to create.
My mother and I worked on a series of photo quilts. Started working on them in 2000. Well, I would say she started working on it before then. She started working on it in probably 2018. And then we started collaborating on it in 2019 and then finished it in late 2020. So my mother does not sew. She took up sewing classes around that time in 2018. She took me to take sewing classes when I was younger because she did not know how to sew, and she really wanted me to know how to sew. She was taking these sewing classes. She started making these quilts on her own, but she never would finish them because she likes the idea of sewing, but it's a lot. It's a lot for her. When I came home that summer, I saw the quilts that she started and I thought that they were really beautiful. And I was really excited about it because I didn't know much about quilting. A lot of my background in sewing is costume design. I was really kind of interested in like making stuff for theater and plays and like things of that manner. Didn't know much about quilting. So it was a moment where it reversed, where she was teaching me how to quilt, which she's never been able to do because she doesn't know how to sew. I was really engulfed in those quilts that she started. We spent the summer where she was picking out blocks, and her favorite part of quilting is actually cutting the shapes, doing the math. That's the part I hate. I love to sew. So she would cut them, send it to me. I would sew it. Then she would cut, sew, and she picked out all of the colors and everything. And I took it after we finished the tops of the quilts. It had no batting or anything. And I said, I'm going to turn this into something. And I didn't tell her what, because my mother was really into like, this needs to be a functional object that we can use within the home. So I kind of took it and ran with it on my own. So she didn't know what was happening. I would bleach the quilts. So originally when we were working on it, they were these completely different colors than what they look like now. So I bleached them to pull some of the color out so that way you still had the patterns that she chose. So that way the image transfer from the family photos could go onto the surface of the quilts. And those pieces, I would say it is kind of different than a lot of the other work that I make. It's like this the series that's really about legacy and archiving like my family's existence on this earth. Also thinking about those images, they're in photo albums, then there's a lot of research about the plastic that is on photo albums and how that actually it's meant to protect the image, but it's actually deteriorating the photos. If you pull the plastic up, there's a possibility that a lot of the image now is destroyed. I was thinking about how can I preserve those images. Right now they're sitting in my mother's kind of just in a bunch of photo books in the attic. I've been spending every summer scanning those images, just trying to digitize it so that way we have a copy of it. And I thought that the quilts would be a really great way to memorialize my family as well. The series of my family, like sitting on the porch. There's another series of my uncle and my mother, also my brother and me. And those pieces, it's really about collaborating with my mom. It's not something that I would make by myself. I don't feel like I would want to be in the studio alone, sewing the quilts, trying to replicate that. So it's a very slow series. It's almost as if it has to happen natural when me and my mother are together and we're like, yeah, we want to work on this project together. But she was really surprised when she saw the final product. And then the VMFA in Richmond, Virginia collected one of the quilts. I told my mom, I said, you're in a museum now. You're like, you're a collected artist. So it made her feel really, really excited about it.
You've also collaborated with your husband. Can you talk a bit about how you approach collaborations?
Yeah, so my husband, he's an artist, Johannes Barfield, and he's a new media artist, but he has a very wonderful ability to create sound in a way that I just find really amazing. And I am in awe of because of the way he's able to put sounds together. So a lot of it is when we're collaborating, I usually come up with the imagery for the videos, and then I will approach him and say, can you make a sound piece for this? It's me giving him direction. So I made a video piece when I was in Senegal. I was in a weaving workshop and was recording the sound of floor looms while I was there. And I also did a lot of field recordings of the ocean and different markets. And then I would give him that sound and say, can you turn this into something? And then sometimes it's him just looking at the video piece and then interpreting it. We've often done video pieces where we're both performing in it. And in that way, it is a collaboration where we both are directing the video. But a lot of times with the collaboration, because I also collaborate with a good friend of mine, Laura Neal, who's a poet. And she usually writes poems that are very specific for the video pieces. And I usually would contact Laura and say, can you just write me some poems? One time I contacted her and said, I'm going to have a step team perform these poems for a video piece, just write something. And she would write it. And I would sit with a collection of poems and then select which ones I wanted to hear her actually recite. She would recite those specific poems that I choose and send me audio. And then I would send that audio to Johannes, and then Johannes would interpret it into a sound piece. And then we would send it back to Laura. If Laura is okay with it, she would hear the sound and then actually rewrite her poetry that would go with the work.
Stephanie, you're making me sad that I have never seen your work in person. Or I've never experienced your work in person. My gosh, that sounds like a delight.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I met Laura at an artist residency in 2018, and we've been collaborating ever since. And it's just really natural because I'm an interdisciplinary artist. It's really hard for me to make alone. I don't like sitting in my studio all day by myself. I can honestly only sit in there for 3 hours max by like creating. And then I have to go back outside or like out into the world and do things. So collaboration is really important to me because I like to make with people and around people. And I think that's why I like to teach as well.
I think that's really interesting because not a lot of artists collaborate. Because if you think about figurative artists, perhaps, they might collaborate in terms of having a person in front of them and they're creating a scene. For me as a a lifestyle photographer, my work is collaboration because there's like 20 people that come together to create a job, to create images for a job, I should say. So I'd love to go back and talk more about your childhood and talk about checkers and talk about how you created a checkered fabric while you were in Ghana and how you use that in in one of your pieces of work my papa used to play. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I was in Senegal for two months, I went to the fabric market. We were looking for fabric, and at that time when I was in Senegal, I like I said, I like to just be out and about. It was really hard for me to want to be in my studio. I just wanted to stay out. We found a way for me to get out of the studio and collaborate with an artist within the community, Osman Ba. But I was in a fabric market and I saw this black and red checkered pattern fabric. And I mean, I wouldn't say there was anything crazy unique about it. You can find black and red checkered fabric here, but it was in that moment, I had a flashback of this memory of playing checkers with my grandfather. My grandfather liked to play checkers all the time and he beat everyone. No one could beat him. So it was just this game. He pulls out his checkerboard and he's like, play me. And he had all these secrets where no one could beat him. Just seeing that fabric just kind of made me think about that memory of playing with my grandfather. And then I also saw a lot of people playing droughts throughout Senegal on white and black checkerboards. It also reminded me of that memory. I bought the fabric and then went back to my studio. And then immediately that phrase, like my papa used to play checkers, went into my head. And the whole time I was at that residency, I was dyeing checkered fabric patterns on cloth just over and over. I used the traditional black and red, but then I also was using a lot of complementary colors that were based off of outfits that I saw when I first got to Senegal. It was these kind of checkered pattern. It was specifically a blue and orange outfit that I saw. I was using a lot of my time just creating those cloths. And then when I came back to America, a lot of it was used for props and photos that I captured later. A lot of my relationship with textiles is me creating props and costumes for it to turn into either a video or a photo piece. My papa used to play checkers, culminated into a solo exhibition at the Sarasota Art Museum last summer, 2023. And that show included a video piece that I made of myself floating adrift over the Atlantic Ocean in a checkered pattern, almost as if I was looking home across the ocean to my family in Seneca, South Carolina, like this self-reflection. It was a very meditative piece about reverence, homecoming. And that piece included sound in a poem. So it included sound from Johannes and then a poem from Laura Neal. And that show also, my papa used to play checkers. A lot of it is about cultural assimilation as well. When I say like my papa used to play checkers, for me, that is about honoring someone in my family that was the closest to our heritage, that before you kind of see generations of people being born and losing sight of those things. My papa used to play checkers is also about a memory of like the dishes that he ate and the land that he tended to, the games that he played in relationship to his ancestry and his African heritage. That show culminated into a piece called We Making Gumbo with a question mark. It is a curtain piece that's made from 196 slip cast okra pieces. And it almost is like a portal when you're in the exhibition where you look through that curtain and you see the video piece of this figure floating over the horizon line. And it was, yeah, it's really hard to talk about that specific phrase because it's so nuanced and it's so about a memory with my grandfather. What I asked other people to interpret what the checkered pattern means to them. There's an art historian that I work with at the University of New Mexico. Her name is Dr. Kirsten Powell Buick. She talks about like the checkered board as a neighborhood, as a reference to the neighborhood, as a reference to the landscapes that shape us and build us. But it also could be a metaphor for conflict as well.
Whew. How long does it take you from the idea to the show? How long is that process?
Well, I would say for that particular video piece in that show, I started working on it in 2019 because it started with a collaboration with me and Laura. Laura was writing poems for me at that time. And then I went to Senegal 2021, and then the show went up in 2023. So it was from 2019 to 2023 building on that work. And I think that allowing that time when you're collaborating with people. So the reason why it took so long to make was when I went to Senegal and placed her poem with a sound piece made from field recordings of my time in Senegal that Johannes made, and then sent the sound piece back to her. And she said, I want to make a whole new poem because the sound is inspiring me a different way. A lot of times it takes that long because I'm accounting for the other people that are involved in creating the work as well. But I also like to sit with pieces. So I usually make probably one body of work a year because I like to really sit with the work that I'm making as well.
How do you know when you're done?
It usually just randomly, you just go in to the studio one day and you're like, this is done. So I don't know. It's you're building towards something, and then one day you go in and it's just surprise you, and it's like this is a finished piece. That is when when it's more intuitive. When my photographic works are not that way. Usually with my photographs, I sketch out the composition almost like if I were to make a painting, which I don't know how to paint, but I sketch out a composition and then I will make the props and then execute. And so I know it's done because it looks similar to the sketch. But when it's an installation piece or something that is more intuitive, one day it just completes itself. And then you're like, oh, okay.
Wow. I was editing some images last night to send in for a refresh of my website, and I was toning it because I like my work to be toned in a very specific way. And I was just going back and forth. I was like, is this it? Because there's no formula. There's not a preset that I will just apply. Each individual image has to be toned. And it was just very interesting because I asked myself, when are you going to be done? You've been here for an hour. Working on 3 images. My next question for you, which isn't the question I was going to ask at all, but as you were chatting, I couldn't help but assuage my curiosity. I would love for you to talk to me about, or maybe there is no link, but I'm curious if there is a link in your mind between the work you did, or the work you do in ceramics and creating the weight of it. Because, in the weight of it, it is all about hair. And I'm curious if you had ceramics in mind when you were creating that. It's not exactly a piece. It is, I don't know, how would you describe it? How would you describe the weight of it first?
Yeah, I did call it a moving audio photography piece. A lot of times, because I think in photos, I'm like, you know what, maybe just one element of this photo could move. When you're watching that piece, there's water that's falling inside of a basket of hair, a woven basket of hair onto this figure, but everything else is still. I have made a few pieces like that where it's a moving audio photography piece. And with that particular piece, I was really interested in ceramics because the body in that work is actually covered in clay. So the figure is covered in Carolina red clay. At that time, my husband, he's from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and he was working with Carolina red clay in his work. So he actually went and harvested the clay from the ground in his hometown, and he brought it with him to a residency. This was during the height of the pandemic. I was at a different residency, in DC, and he was in Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and I drove there to hunker down with him during the lockdown. And he had a bucket of Carolina red clay in his studio. During the height of the pandemic, I had locks. I originally had locks for 9 years. And I usually I deal with anxiety. So I unraveled every single lock on my head with a little needle during the pandemic. And I ended up with a giant bag of all the hair that I had on my head for that 9 years. That was what was actually used to create the vessel in that piece. That piece is in relationship to ceramics, of thinking of the body as a vessel, because the body is literally covered in clay, but then also the hair is now sculpted into this basket. And I titled that piece The Weight of It, WAIT, to talk about that passage of time, like the 9 years of growing my hair. I actually put in a material description for that work, 9 years of detangled Afro hair. So to talk about that passage of time, but also talk about like a literal weight as well of carrying that with me. But also a lot of times when I move through the world with my natural hair, and I see it a lot here in New Mexico because there is a small percentage of Black people, it's politicized, when it's almost as if this is who I am. This is who I was born to look like. And when I move throughout the world, because of me wearing my hair in its natural state, it's turned into a political statement. That piece also is talking about that when it says the weight of it, just the experience of unraveling my hair, the time it took, the 9 years of growing it, and then thinking about location and place as well, growing up in the southeastern region of America and seeing that red clay. My mother's backyard is filled with red clay, so she usually has to kind of tend to the soil to get certain vegetables to grow as well. So all of that was embedded into it. So it definitely is thinking about ceramics a lot in that piece.
I don't know where I first encountered that piece, but it never occurred to me that the subject was covered in clay. Or perhaps I just saw it in passing. I should have dug deeper to better understand what you meant with that piece. Oh, so interesting. So you mentioned that when you were growing up that you were involved in theater and, I think you took dance, but you never did anything with the visual arts. And I'm really curious what you think the young Stephanie would think about the work that you're doing now and what it is in general that you're doing now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question because I would say that probably the younger me would be really amazed about me being a professor, like probably more so than than the museum shows and and all of that perspective of me as someone younger, because I've had like very few Black professors when I was in school. And unfortunately, like there's a low percentage of Black professors in general. That probably would be what would stand out the most to my younger self. But I remember when I was in school having all these goals and aspirations of just little small things, of just how important it was to sell a piece of work and to be in a museum collection now is really amazing. And you don't plan for that to happen, but it just does. I think it would just be more shock and amazement, to be honest, because I was denied. I was not accepted into schools for college because I was really bad in high school. I had really bad grades. There was a school that rejected me and then sent me a letter and said, actually, you made a mistake. So you can come to college. And so I think just the idea that I'm a professor, and I went to so many different undergrads, I went to so many different schools. I just think that the younger me would just be really amazed and wow.
Do you think that your early experience with school, does it influence you? And if so, how does it influence the way that you teach?
Yeah, I think it influences the decisions of where I teach more so than how. I am very adamant about teaching at public universities. I do not have an interest in teaching at private schools, mainly just because of what was accessible to me when I was younger and wanting to be in those spaces, and also wanting to be in conversation with those students to let them know what's possible for them. And also, I really like to be in a setting. Right now, I'm teaching at a Hispanic serving institution. I'm teaching at a minority majority school. That is also just really important to me. A lot of times, it's not that they're not capable, they just don't know about the resources around us. That I prioritize where I teach, and it very intentionally because of that.
Oh gosh, Stephanie, I feel like I could talk with you forever. I have so many more questions, but we have a limited amount of time. I guess one of the things that I want to ask you is if you could talk about, this being our last question, if you could talk about what is one book or concept or something that's really been influential in your life. For example, I'll share how learning to say no to things that didn't interest me instead of going along with people has really been life changing. I couldn't conceive how much I could say no now to doing things that I didn't want to do. So that's completely changed my life and it's made me a lot happier. And I'm wondering if there's a concept or a book or something that you've taken on or acquired in the last few years that has made a meaningful difference in your life.
Yeah, I would say mine is actually very similar to yours. So I have this thing that I tell myself always is to slow down, and that's I just really carry that with me. I prioritize self-care a lot. So I get my 8 hours of sleep every night, and I'm very adamant on self-care, on rest. I spend time with things, and I usually like to take my time and slow down. That's something that I carry with me. And also, there was this quote that my husband said: to be original is to be in denial. And I really just found that really interesting, because this idea of having to reinvent the wheel all the time or make something that is so-called original, not having that kind of carried with me when I go into the studio, but instead embracing other artists that are making work like me or in conversation with me, collaboration, thinking about how all these different thoughts and ideas can come together. I'm really inspired when I see artists that are making work similar to mine, because it feels like a movement, and I can kind of reach out to those people and be in conversation and see how we can build off of one another as well. So I would say those two.
How great is that? Oh, that's amazing. I feel like that should be on a wall or something. To be original is to be in denial. It's so true. It's so true. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so pleased. I've followed your work for a while now. And if I could blush, if you could see that I were blushing, I would be. I'm just over the moon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me and having me.
Yay. That was awesome.